Hello, listeners. I'm your host, Jeff Hatter. Thank you for tuning in to Yerba Travels Podcast, the place that delivers all the marvelous wonders of our beautiful world from firsthand accounts of people who live in these exotic places. After listening, head over to yerbatravels.com to find out more cool information. That's yerbatravels.com. And don't forget to subscribe and join the Yerba Travels community. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's conversation. All right, my guest today is joining us from the city of Five Rams, also known as Guangzhou, out in China, and his name is John. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jeff, and everyone out there. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to interview me for your podcast. My name is John Nguyen, and I've been in the overseas education industry for over 8 years. I lived in South Korea from 2012 to 2016, and I'm currently based in China since 2016. I'm originally born and bred from San Jose, California, and I grew up Vietnamese American.
Wow, that's quite the background you've got there. It seems like you floated around quite a bit.
A little bit. I think being Vietnamese American, I've always had like that innateness to float around a little bit. Not really American, not really Vietnamese. So out and about.
Oh, that's awesome. I think a lot of people kind of feel that way now. And, you know, a lot of our listeners might feel the same way, that we're not just from one place anymore, that, you know, their history and their heritage and culture is all starting to mix now. And, you know, I think, you know, what you can share today, a lot of people might be able to relate with.
Yeah, I think like growing up, I've always considered myself not just one citizen of one country, mixed heritage, American born. So I kind of feel like a citizen of the world instead of just, just American, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. A citizen of the world. I like that, actually. Yeah. Well, I want to start the podcast with food, because I absolutely love food. And some of the places that you named, Vietnam, South Korea, China, they have some amazing foods. So what can you tell us? I don't know. What do you want to start with? Do you want to talk about Vietnamese food first or Chinese food?
Oh man, let's talk about Vietnamese food. Because I grew up
Oh,
with Vietnamese
yeah.
food. It's light. There's a lot of flavor to it because it's a mix of like Southeast Asian and Chinese food, and it
Mm-hmm.
has its own like um, unique flair to it as well. I think because they use fresh ingredients,
Yeah.
um, and so there's just a lot of variety depending on like if you're visiting the north, the middle, or the south, and even those certain areas have their own particular dishes that people would get usually. Like southern people, they love to eat pho,
Mm-hmm.
the rice noodles dish
Yeah.
is really good. Like
Yeah.
soup, especially for cold nights like this, man. It's crazy cold. It's crazy cold.
Yeah, I think pho is one of the kind of main dishes to come out of Vietnam. I know when I speak to people and I ask them if they've traveled there or tried Vietnamese food, that always seems to be the go-to.
Yeah, there's a lot of other ones too, like bánh lỗ. Um, what was
What's
it?
that?
What other ones? It's like little it's like little dough, cooked doughs,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like little man, it's hard to describe. It's been a while since I've eaten that. Um, there's it's kind of salty because they put like a little shrimp, dried shrimp on it, and some herbs, and then you dip it in chili sauce, and it's really good. I think it's white colored. I think
Mm-hmm.
you'll know it when you see it. I'll show you some pictures later, but it's crazy good. There's also bánh xèo, which is like Vietnamese pancakes, and then
Oh, yeah.
it's really thin and crispy, and so like you can put a lot of different fillings in it. It's not savory. It's more, how do I describe this? Man, you're making me hungry. Um, just thinking about all this food. Like in the middle, they usually put like cooked mung bean sprouts, and like bits of pork or shrimp, and you dip
Mhm.
it in. You wrap it. You put it in lettuce, and you wrap it, and then you dip it in chili sauce. It's really good.
That sounds
But
delicious.
it is, man. So let's see, Vietnamese, Korean food. You know about Korean food.
Yep.
There's like soups, rice dishes, chicken, pork, and all that. Um, but man, I think out of Vietnamese, Korean, and Chinese food, I'll prefer Korean food any day. It's fresh usually. It's pretty good, and they stew it a long time. And I've been looking at that kimchi jjigae, dude.
So what kind of food would you recommend if people want to travel to Korea to get the food? Like what's something that you must eat when you're in Korea?
Oh my god. I would have to say kamjatang.
Mm.
It's spine pork spine soup.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you translate it into English, you're like, okay, it's potato soup. But if you know what it is, it's like, oh my god, it's like pork spine. It's
Ye-
it's it's like really rich. The soup is really, really rich. And there's like potatoes in there, and there's like pork and stuff like that. It's really good.
Yeah, for the listeners out there, gamjatang or haejangguk is as John said, a type of pork spine. So you get kind of chunks of spine, little sections of spine. I think you get what, two or three per bowl, and then they're
Yeah.
mixed in with some fresh vegetables, leafy greens, and yeah, and it's like John said, it's super fresh. Yeah, that's actually one of my favorites. And I was actually just talking with somebody about that the other day because many people in Korea call that the hangover soup. That and Jang. And so, yeah, we were just talking about that. That's kind of funny. But I interviewed um, a Korean who lives in Toronto last week, and she said that bulgogi and samgyeopsal are also some good dishes that people have to try when they come to Korea.
Yeah, man. There's just so much variety. It's unlike the West. People in Asia generally eat everything and anything, so
Hmm.
nothing is like kind of thrown away.
Yep.
If you're in China, you have like what is that, pork blood. It's like a pork blood brick. It's
Like
not
a
like really.
coagulated blood. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. They use it for soups. They use it for porridge, and I
Hmm.
don't know. It gives it a little extra like hearty flavor to it.
Yeah, hearty flavor and a bit of texture too. We have it here. I don't know if you tried it when you here, if you ever tried sunji, but that's the kind of coagulated blood soup that they have here. And you're right, it adds some. It's got a very unique flavor to it. It's very
Mm,
good. There's nothing kind of off-putting about it until you hear the name and what it is, and people are like, ugh, you know.
yeah.
But if nobody told you the name and you were just told that it was some kind of soup or whatnot, I think most people would enjoy that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's, I don't know, like different. I think it's just up to preference. But like everywhere I've been to, there's always like this special dish that shines. Like in Korea, it was kimchi jjigae and like kamjatang. In
Hmm.
Beijing, it was like Peking duck. In
Mm.
Changsha, where I split my time, is literally anything spicy. And so you have like tofu skin and chili oil, stinky tofu, um, which isn't too bad. It's just the smell is kind of off-putting, but
Hmm.
it tastes really good, and it's really like good for these cold. Like I'm in Changsha right now. I usually split my time up between Guangzhou and Changsha,
Okay.
and this week is like, oh my gosh, it is so freaking cold. But yeah, if given the chance, I would go for some tofu skin and chili oil, or stinky tofu like right now.
Mm.
It's a pretty good
That
treat.
sounds pretty good. Yeah, the spiciness on a cold night, that sounds good. Now, one thing I know is, and they might call it something different in China, malatang.
Oh, we have that.
Do you guys have that
Yep.
out there? Yeah. Is that a
Yep.
popular dish? Or is that just just
No, no,
a
it's quite popular. It's
is
quite
it?
popular. You
Okay.
might want to describe to like the listeners what it is.
Yeah, well, um, it's kind of hard to explain it's super spicy, and I have the only time I've had it was here in Korea. I went to a restaurant with our buddy Lance,
Mm,
um, and at this restaurant it wasn't a buffet, but you got to pick what food you wanted in the soup,
yep.
and then they weighed the bowl, and you paid
Yeah.
however much the bowl weighed. So you got to put in
It's
as much as you wanted or this and that. And that was the first time I tried malatang, but I honestly cannot remember what was in it. I mean, other than the soup
dude,
and noodles.
it is so common in China. Like downstairs from the apartment where I live right now,
Hmm.
they have a malatang place. You literally just go, it's like skewers of food, right? And like vegetables and like meats and stuff, and they weigh it. And you can
Yeah.
ask for like soup or no soup at the end,
Yeah.
and they you can have like whatever you want in the dish. I think that's like Chinese mainlanders who brought that over to Korea, because there's like a
Oh,
population of Chinese people in Korea. It's
okay.
pretty
Okay.
good. Yeah.
So is that what malatang means? Like just kind of assorted food in a bowl?
To be honest, I have no idea.
Okay. Okay. Well, fair enough. Yeah, I know that whatever I had, Lance told me to get something spicy, and boy, was it spicy. That was probably the spiciest soup I had, and that's all I remember is malatang soup, putting all the food together, and it being super spicy.
Yeah.
So, I sorry to our listeners out there, but if anybody knows and wants to, email us and let us know a bit more about it, feel free to do that. But so you say you split time between Changcha and Guangzhou, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How about
Um,
in
you
Guangzhou? Which city is bigger, actually? Let me ask you that. Which city's bigger?
Guangzhou is ridiculously bigger,
Okay.
but in like the Western sense, both cities are humongous. I think Changsha has a population of 8 million people, and yeah, and Guangzhou has a population of about 12 million people for just the city proper. These are like really big metropolitan areas.
Huge.
Yep. Um, let's see. Changsha is more historic. Well, they're both kind of historic in a way.
Okay.
Changsha is kind of like Mao. Chairman Mao was born near Changsha, and Changsha is like the provincial capital of Hunan province. And
Mm,
so it's an up and coming. It's supposedly an up and coming city because they're trying to. It's the largest city within the province, and it's also one of the more, let's see, business oriented cities. If you go to like any other city within the province, they're a bit smaller, and
okay.
a lot of other people actually come into Changsha for work and for business, and so
Uh,
it's growing. Yeah.
so people live outside and they come in to the city for work and stuff.
Well, they try to relocate into Changsha.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
What kind?
Same thing
What
with
kind of?
Guangzhou.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm just kind of curious of what type of jobs are in that city. Is it like a tech city or a finance?
For Changsha, man, I think it's a bit of everything. I
Okay.
think back in the days it used to be agriculture, but now they're getting into like construction. There is some tech if you go around, but it's just, I don't know. A lot of people. It's kind of strange being in a city and then you're not really thinking about the city. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just if you go around China into any big city, all of them kind of look alike at this point. At this point,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of like modernization happening around China. And so sometimes for my job, I travel quite a bit. Sometimes I wake up, I'm like, oh, where am I? And a lot of times, like the only way you would know is if you looked at a building and it showed some of the the Chinese characters for the name of the city that you're in, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm in this city now, or I got to do this now because I'm in this city, you know.
Mm.
So Changsha is just becoming like any other big city.
And most of the big cities seem quite uniform.
There is some like special flair to each city, but it's it's pretty uniform. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, just like in Korea, there are some cities that look quite similar to others. So, well, tell us a
Oh
little
yeah, but
bit. Oh, go ahead. Tell us what.
oh getting back to what's there to eat in Guangzhou.
Yeah.
I think Guangzhou has a very what is this? It's they eat anything. I'm not trying to say this. I'm not trying to be like derogatory in any way, but if you're in Guangzhou people have like a really broad or palate to eat a lot of things. But what I notice most and what's people from Guangzhou like to eat, they like to eat like savory, sweet things. You know, dim sum, chicken feet, beef tripe, desserts. You can find a lot of dishes
Okay.
in Guangzhou, and it's pretty good. I mean, if you've ever had Chinese abroad in like America or the UK or something, a lot of people, a lot of the food that you've tasted actually originate from that area, Guangzhou.
Oh, so that's kind of the area that imports the quote unquote Chinese food to the world, huh?
That area, yeah, like
Yeah.
Hong Kong, Guangzhou area, yeah.
Mm. Well, if our any of our listeners are, going to visit or decide to move to Guangzhou, what's your favorite restaurant to go to? What's a must eat?
What for me?
Yeah, where do you like to go, and where
Oh,
should travelers go when they visit?
uh, oh my God, there's just so many places you can try. It's really hard to like just pinpoint an exact location. Um, if you're in for hot pot, there's always Hai Di Lao. Oh my God, the service at Hai Di Lao, it's ridiculous. It's hot pot, but they service you like you're your VIP. You know, you go in and they service you whatever you want to eat. They have you pick up your own like sauces. They serve you. It's ridiculous service. You just have to like visit Hai Di Lao in China. They have Hai Di Laos abroad in like America, but it's
Oh,
just not
okay.
the same. It's just not the same. Um, like I visited a Hai Di Lao in America, and the service is really good. Don't get me wrong, but
Hmm.
in China, they go above and beyond what's good and what's expected.
That's awesome. That's fantastic about a lot of Asian countries that I visited. They tend to do that. They just the service is fantastic over here.
Um, see, street food. I think you can try street food. It's like in moderation is okay, but I haven't had good experience with street food too much in China.
Hmm.
So if people want to come over to like China and try it out, by all means, just try it out in moderation, not overgorge yourself because it's not the highest quality food, I would say.
Okay. Well, that's
Um,
some fantastic
yeah,
information. I mean, it's awesome to know that there's so many good places in one area too.
yeah, man.
So you mentioned that you split your time between these two cities. What's transportation like in those cities and kind of connecting them with each other? What's the transportation like in China in general?
the um the infrastructure for transportation is like really good.
Hmm.
Um, they use trains. They use trains to get around, like bullet trains.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and so Guangzhou to Changsha normally takes about 2.5 to 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Is that by train?
Uh, that's by train. Yeah,
Okay.
uh, that's pretty convenient. There's quite a lot of trains that go back and forth. And within the cities themselves, you can actually use, man, there's just so much variety. You can use taxis, of course. You can use Uber, not Uber, but like Didi and Tao Tao just to get around in the city. Those are like Uber shared cars.
All right. And
Um,
what were the names of those? DD and
Tao Tao. Oh,
Tao
well,
Tao.
Didi is more of a Didi DIDI is more like a shared car service, and Tao Tao they use electric vehicles. Tao Tao is a CAO, and it's a company that's getting pretty popular in China, and
Okay.
they're able to um, they're just like what? They're just like There's just like a like environmentally safer form of taxis. That's my description of it, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and living in big cities, they have like really convenient metro lines, like subway stations and things like that. That I tend to use when I'm not too lazy.
Now, do you happen to own a car?
I actually do not.
Okay.
But we just rented a car. My wife and I just rented a car recently. And that was a pretty good experience, I think.
Yeah, what was it like? One thing that I always recommend when people go is that they rent a car or something to not just see the big, metropolitan cities or whatever, but to get kind of to the outskirts and kind of gives them a bit of freedom as well. So, what was it like driving a rental car?
Man, I would totally get out of driving in China if I could. First,
Really?
you need a license. Yeah, first you need a license. Second, everyone's a defensive driver. And thirdly, if you get into an accident, the other person might not speak English. Actually, a great chance of them not being able to speak English. It's hard to drive with no license. There's a bunch of cameras on the road, so if there's something that does happen, you're a foreigner and you're in a different country. Not a good idea.
Yeah.
But like if you're here long term, like owning a car is a must if you're here long term. If you have a family or if you have pets,
Hmm.
it's just more convenient because live animals aren't really allowed on the metro lines, and you'll have picky taxi drivers who would say no dogs or no cats or something. Um, if you're in a smaller city or living in the rural area, you can get away with having a motorbike or an e-bike.
Hmm. Cool.
But if you're here long term, you definitely need a car. It's because if you're here long term, most likely you're here for a long term job. You're here for a family.
Right.
A car serves as a status symbol. It serves as a form of transportation. You might not end up using it a lot, but when you do end up using it, it feels great.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's kind of a form of freedom. Like you can just get up and go, and as you mentioned, you don't have to worry about taking your pet on the subway or trying to find the right taxi that'll take you wherever you need to go, whether it's the vet or to the park or whatever, right?
Yeah. If you're within the city, I would just recommend let's see, metro, the subway stations, or shared bikes. Shared bikes are actually really common here too.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, I was going to ask about that. They're becoming popular in a lot of places. So with a shared bike, you just put like your ID in, or do you pay money? How does that work?
it's a crazy thing, but every mostly everyone in China is hooked up to either Alipay or WeChat, and they have like several different apps. So in some ways, China is a bit more modern than most Western countries. So like a lot of your ID information is already on your WeChat, and so you scan the QR code on the mobike or the shared bike or something,
Hmm.
and then you unlock the bike, you take it for a spin, however long, and then when you're done, you lock the bike, and everything's automated, so they just charge you for however long you use it for or however far you traveled.
Wow, that's cool.
And I think in the bigger cities they don't have this, but in the smaller cities like Changsha they do.
Hmm.
They have e-scooters, basically like little motorbikes, little e-motorbikes you can rent, and then you can travel longer distance than the actual shared bike. It's pretty crazy.
Wow. And I assume those are a bit more expensive.
It's a little bit more expensive, but the cost is like really negligible if you think about it.
Is
It's
it?
really
What?
it's really really small. I think my friend got away with paying I think how much did he pay? It was something like 20 or 30 RMB for the whole day.
Oh my God. And what would that relate to in, say, US dollars?
That's about $4 or $5 for
Wow.
the whole day. Yeah.
Wow. If only more cities had those, those services for people, that would be awesome. And for a price like that too.
Yeah, it is incredibly cheap to live in China.
So that yeah, you caught me up on the cheapness. I'm still hung up on that. I'm a bit speechless actually.
I mean,
But
like if you want to talk about food, how cheap you can eat for food. I mean, you could get away with eating like you could get away with spending, I would say, 50 or 60 RMB for a whole day's worth of food if you're on the cheap, and that's about $10 if you're
wow.
going on the cheap. That is, yeah.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
wanna if you wanna eat like finer things, it's gonna cost more. But let's say a three-course meal that'll cost about, oh man, 80 to 120 RMB, which is roughly, how much is that? $12 to $20 for a three-course
Okay.
meal, 3 or 4 course meal. Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty good. That is pretty good. And
We
it's like that in
mhm.
most cities. Like, does the price do the prices fluctuate a lot depending on where you are?
Let's see. In Changsha, it's quite cheap, but there are other places that are a lot cheaper if you're going for local food, right? If you're going for Chinese food, it's going to be ridiculously cheap. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe let's see how much you could probably get away with eating 14 to 20 RMB for a meal, and that's about $2 to $3 for a meal.
Yeah, I would say that's quite low. Wow.
Yeah, like bowl noodles or something, you know.
Yeah, the basics, right?
Yeah, the basics.
Mm.
In Guangzhou, man, it gets a bit more expensive if you're in the bigger cities.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, I think it's like that in most countries that people travel to. Once you hit the big cities, prices go up just for just about anything, whether it's food, taxis, apartments, whatever. Taxes tend to, or
Yeah,
prices, sorry, prices tend to go up.
yeah. But I think overall it's still quite affordable. Like, man, if you want to talk about like affordability, like in Changsha, I rented a 2 bedroom apartment, and that was, how big was that? That was about almost about 50 or 60 square meters, right? And that was just me and my girlfriend at the time,
Hmm.
wife now. But that was about, how much? I paid 2,500 RMB a month, and that's like less than $400.
Wow. And apart, 400, a two bedroom, you said? Two bedroom?
Two two bedroom in Changsha, like just a few years ago. Um, Now, like I live in Guangzhou, and the same 2,500 RMB a month only gives you about like a 20 square meter apartment where I live.
So less than half of what you were in.
Yeah, but I mean
Mm.
it's kind of good because it like location matters a lot. So
Right.
it's like a little small shack, not a shack, but like a hole in the wall in an apartment building, and I'm barely there because I'm usually traveling for work anyways, so I'm barely there in my apartment.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't need anything much bigger than that then. I mean, for your needs, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
but it's just funny to see like how much, what what money can buy you in certain areas.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's on a lot of people's plates, whether they're moving there or, going for a long period of stay or just traveling there. It's always about money. And it's good to know these kind of things because, it helps you budget. So,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
talking about these cities and all these amazing things, the food and the transportation that are inside, what are some surrounding areas that you think people should visit if they come there to kind of help them get off the beaten path and explore some new areas?
Yeah, let's see. Let's talk about Changsha because that's where I'm located.
Okay.
Um, so Changsha is in Hunan province, and there's Fenghuang City, which is Phoenix Town. It's an
Hmm.
ancient city. It's a big tourist city. But a lot of the places are really old within that city itself. They leave it old because tourism purposes. At night they light up the whole city, and so you can see like outlines of like buildings and stuff, which is really really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um, there's also Zhangjiajie, which are also called the Avatar Mountains. They like the movie Avatar based the jungle off of these mountains.
Oh,
So
really?
if you remember, yeah, if you remember like how the set of Avatar looked like, um, there's like jungles
Hmm.
and stuff, and there's like strange rocks, right?
Right.
And so that's Jiangjiajie.
Wow, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. That's cool.
In Guangzhou, I heard that Yangzhou is a pretty good city to visit. It's a bit rural, but you can get there quite easily. Transportation is really good. Um, you can also visit Guilin. Guilin is actually there's some scenic spots in Guilin. You could rent scooters in Guilin because it's a whole different province. Um,
Hmm.
in I think Guangxi province. Very these places are very accessible, but they're pretty picturesque if you're into like scenic spots and just checking out the unbeaten path.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last podcast I did, we were talking about Colorado and Arizona and out west in America, and you just brought up picturesque, and I think that's one reason that a lot of people actually travel is, yeah, they want to see the city, but there are some beautiful sites just outside the city that are easily accessible. Like you mentioned, most of these are accessible sometimes by public transportation, but if you rent a car or a van or something, you can drive to them pretty easily yourself too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
those are.
usually don't drive. Yeah, I usually don't drive in China because you kind of need a license for that, and I haven't gotten around to getting my license in China. So I tend to use public transportation and hired car, which are not expensive at all. You can actually come here and hire rent your car quite cheaply.
So when you say you need a license, would an international license work?
No,
No. Okay.
China's not part of the international license treaty. And
Good to
so
know.
even if you get an international license, you can't drive in China. You have to go through the process. Um, I actually got my license in Korea, and that was a pretty straightforward process. But in China, if you read up the process to get for foreigners to get licenses, it's pretty ridiculous.
Is it really?
It's
Goodness.
a little ridiculous. They translate like the test that you're going to be taking is translated, but it's not translated well. And so
Oh no.
sometimes I've heard from foreigners that sometimes they have to guess um, what a certain phrase meant, and I think you need like a score of like 85 or 90% just to pass the written test. So it's a bit hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you got to score pretty high on those tests. And I think that's just about anywhere, but that's so funny that you got to guess and just fingers crossed, buddy. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Those are some cool spots that you mentioned, and hopefully anybody traveling in the area can get out to see those, whether it's through hired car or rented car. But I kind of want to shift a little bit and talk about culture.
Mm.
Earlier, you mentioned that your heritage is Vietnamese. You now live in China. You were born in America. You seem to have a lot of culture mixed up in there, which is awesome in my opinion. Uh, but can you tell us a little bit? Tell us a little bit about the Vietnamese culture and maybe a little bit about the Chinese culture. Like what is one thing about the Vietnamese culture that you really want people to know?
Oh man. Um,
Or something that you've heard in the past and went, wait a minute, that's not true about Vietnamese culture. Maybe you want to set the record straight on something.
it's kind of hard because like a lot of these places, Vietnam, China, Korea, Vietnamese Americans, they have they have like their own distinct origins. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Vietnamese culture, a lot of what I've grown up with was more like a Confucianist style upbringing.
Okay.
The father is like, you respect your elders, you respect your mother, you respect your father, you respect your grandfathers, and
Mm-hmm.
your mother respected the elders and things like that. And so when it comes to values, it's quite similar but different in a way. I'm not trying to say that Vietnamese and Chinese culture are the same. I'm just saying that they're very similar in a way, you know. Um,
Yeah, and they
Viet-
have like kind of the same premise as you mentioned, the Confucianism, right?
yeah, my wife is Chinese, and so what like when we first talked about marriage and things like that, it's like she mentioned a lot of what's necessary for marriage, and I'm like, oh, that's quite similar to what's necessary for Vietnamese marriages as well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
like there's a dowry, like quote dowry. You show it's about face as well. You show people like how much the bride is worth, you know.
Oh,
But
okay.
you don't really. I guess you give it to them like the parents temporarily, and then they give it back to you like later on or something like that. But
Mm.
it's quite the same thing with Vietnamese culture as well. But I think in China they try to show off a bit more because um, in China they're only limited to like one or two kids, and so they want the best for their kids. You know, not to say that Vietnamese people don't,
Right.
um, but it's less of it's less it's less emphasized in Vietnamese culture. It's more like fun. I
Okay.
feel.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because well, not I don't know too much about the cultures to get into that, but sharing parts of culture is, I mean, that happens throughout Asia, right? I mean, there are certain things like that in Korean culture as well. But
Yeah.
what are some of the what are some examples of dowries that are given?
I think, man, sometimes talking about this, I'm confused with between Vietnamese and Chinese,
Okay.
because I grew up part Chinese as well,
Oh, did you
because
really?
that's also my heritage. My grandfather was Chinese, so I kind of have a little bit Chinese blood, I guess.
Okay.
Um, but the dowry for Vietnamese and Chinese, I think it's gold earring, gold necklace, gold ring, or gold bracelet. Um, what else? In Chinese, they typically require a man to have a house and a car. In some places, a car, um, and then the actual dowry money, which can be like in the tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Um, yeah, basically the money's just for show usually.
Right.
Um, and then you have to give red envelopes to the relatives, which in turn they'll give you a red envelope for like in the upcoming Chinese New Year. That's the Chinese way of doing things.
And
The Vietnamese
what's the symbolism behind the red envelope?
red envelope is just lucky money.
Okay.
Basically, how I feel about it is that you kind of have to earn respect. In order to earn respect, you have to give respect first, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's I to me that's what the premise of the red envelope money giving and receiving is. There's also some of that in Vietnamese culture, um, but it's not to that big of an extent within Chinese culture itself.
Okay. Yeah. 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 So, like I said, similarities between all the Asian cultures. Something similar in Korea. You mentioned the house and car. Well, that's kind of, you kind of have to show that you're ready to purchase the house or already have a house. And
Yeah,
it's kind of funny in the, the kind of wedding culture over here where the man purchases the house, and then actually the woman does all the furnishing for the house. So she buys the furniture and everything for the house. So I don't really think they use it as like a dowry, but you kind of have to show at least that, you're prepared to start a family, right?
yeah. I think that's the important thing because like there's so many people in China. Like what makes you special? What makes a person special?
Out
If
of
they're
out
not
of
if
what, 2 billion people now?
like they should be able to provide for their spouse or being taken care of by their spouse.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's the end game. Like what would
Hmm.
happen if something happened to you? Like how would your spouse survive? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Are they left high and
Yeah.
dry, or, do they have a cushion? Are they set? What is it? Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. That's some good advice. Well,
Yeah, a
I'm
lot
not
of
gonna, oh, go ahead.
oh yeah, some of the Westerners that I've talked to here, they're just like, oh, why don't, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do that? And I'm just like, when they're telling me this, I'm just like, dude, like, it's really, it's kind of, it seems really far fetched in a Westerner's
Hmm.
mind, like, oh,
Hmm.
why am I putting up so much money? Why is this money just for show? Why am I giving away money? But it's kind of hard to equate money with respect. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, I
if
totally
you if you,
understand.
yeah, if you don't spend the money, you're not going to get any money back. So you have to spend a little to get a little in the end.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, most, I'm not, I can't speak for everybody in the West, but it does seem, as you mentioned, like we see things from our point of view only, right? Like, why do
Yeah.
I have to put this up? Why do I need to do this? Instead of, like you said, where it's a respect thing, where you're actually doing this from a different point of view, right? And in
Mm,
most cases, you're going to get it back one way or another. You
that
know,
is true. Yeah.
it's like the, what do you want to call it, the karma of dowry. Like you give and you receive, right? And that's how a
Yes.
lot a
It's
lot of Asian cultures see things. So yeah, I think that's some good advice. You still with us?
yeah. Yeah. I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to switch a little bit, and I'm not going to ask about wedding tips. I think men and women out there can figure those out for themselves. Um, but I do want some kind of your tips or advice for people traveling to China. What's some kind of important things for them to know about visiting China,
Visiting China. Um,
or for
let's
those
see.
looking to possibly move there? Some tips for them.
For people visiting, just if you're visiting, just make sure you know where you want to go and plan it out with proper paperwork. I'm talking about a visa. I'm talking about like a good itinerary because it's easy to get lost in China. China, it looks small in a map, but it's just as big as the United States.
Mm-hmm.
In China, be how do I sound? How do I say this without sounding like okay? It's China, and Big Brother's always watching. So be on your best behavior. If you do small things, be sure of what you're doing. Be conscious. Don't come to China, get all like drunk and be belligerent and things like that.
Yeah, don't
There
be the
will be
drunk
consequences.
idiot.
Yeah. So learn some Chinese culture before coming. Xixia goes a long way, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Make sure you understand some of the laws and regulation around in China. What might work for a local Chinese person might not always necessarily work well for a foreigner. So if you catch somebody smoking, um, like in certain areas, and you do the same, you might get in trouble because you would stand out. You might stand out more than that Chinese person. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
um, living here, I would suggest same with the paperwork. As a foreigner, you be under the spotlight quite frequently, and they'll want to know why you're here. So make sure everything's under tight wraps. So make sure if you're here for work, make sure you have a visa for work, because the regulations have been tightening up within China a lot. Um, and so make sure your paperwork's filled out. Make sure you have a proper visa requirement and things like that. Um, I've been here for a few years already, and um, but I haven't done it personally. But learning language, Chinese language, is a ridiculous must if you want to live here long term. Because you can live here as a foreigner, but just being able to learn the language gives you a little bit more insight into a lot of things, like ordering food. Um, you like certain going out, being more independent.
Mm-hmm.
It creates like a better lifestyle within China itself, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip for just about anywhere that you live. At least learn kind of the basics. At least a basic conversation level would be a
Yep.
must. And then, depending on what you want to do, whether it's leisure activity or job wise, you can build from there. But that's a great tip. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I
like
want to
when
I
mhm.
want to ask you, you're talking about paperwork. I'm kind of curious when you travel, from province to province, do you need paperwork in that sense?
Man, well, when I hop on a train, I have to before hopping on the train, I have to bring my visa. I have to bring my passport. My passport goes everywhere I go, especially when I'm traveling.
Good to
Um,
know. Mm.
it has your visa. It has and if you leave the country and then come back, you have to actually check in with public security bureau, and they print you out like a new paperwork saying that you've registered and you're okay to live in China.
Wow. Oh, see, that's some good information to know for people traveling or looking to live there. Yeah.
Some people don't do it though.
And what happens?
But
What happens to people? Is it just a fine, or are they thrown in jail, or I mean, what
well,
happens?
they like the rule says or the regulation says that within 24 hours you must within 24 hours of coming back into the country, you have to register yourself, local police bureau, securities bureau, um, and basically you just I don't know, you spend like 30 minutes talking to them, they print you out something, you get re-registered. Um, if you don't do it, you might face fines. A lot of my friends who haven't done it, they haven't faced a fine yet. But I think if you're intending on staying long term, it's good to have like paperwork to show that you abide by the law.
Definitely.
That's that's just my thinking, but and it takes a little bit of effort. But if other people want to like do their own thing or do their own way, like I'm not trying to judge. I'm just saying what might be easier long term.
No, absolutely. And, rules and laws are there for a purpose. It's not to be, a dictative lord over you per se. They're there for a purpose. And, you know, re-registering has its own purpose in China. So no, that's good news because I don't think any visitor or long-term resident wants to be thrown in jail or get a huge fine or let alone kicked out of the country. You know?
But if you're going to hotels, if you're staying at just hotels, they'll register you at the hotels, and you'll have no problem.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So it's just like, so every time you go to a hotel and register, you show your passport, and they
Mm-hmm.
take a photocopy of your visa and your entry stamp. You know,
Yeah.
they'll show that to the Public Securities Bureau. Same thing.
Oh, that's good. So when you check into a hotel, you don't have to do it yourself. They do it for you.
They do it, yeah. But if you're going back into your own apartment in China, you do it. You have to
I
register
gotcha.
yourself. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I gotcha. Well, hopefully that makes sense to anybody out there that's traveling and that's a little insight that many people may or may not know about. So that's some good advice, John. Thanks. So I'm gonna jump again, and this is one of my favorite parts here is you're the expert, John. You're all things education in China now. So I know your background a little bit. I know you've been in education for many years. Uh, for our listeners out there, John and I actually did our masters together in education. So I know that he's an expert in this. So John, I want to ask you, what do you think about the education in China, whether it's just general education or second language education, ESL? And maybe tell us what you think about what's the future of education like in China.
Oh man, that's a lot of heavy hitting questions, man.
Take it one by one.
So, all right, so it's 2020, and primary schoolers, middle schoolers, and even high school and college age students are looking ways to improve their English. So, yes, ESL will be here for, if not for a short time, then for a longer time. Education here is quite like the education system in Korea. It's test based. There's an emphasis on the strong teacher model where students are, quote, the vessels to fill up with knowledge and facts versus the Western emphasis more on the students, like student centered methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so here, just like in Korea, maybe just like in Vietnam, the teachers are lecturing the students. The students are expected to memorize. However, like there's been a shift, like contemporary parenting. They want more of a skills-based knowledge and approach, and they're willing to invest more on education versus tests these days. So, so there's been a little shift towards more relevant skills. Like you could take classes to emphasize test taking.
Mm-hmm.
You fill in the blanks, circle here, circle there, or you can actually do something that's more communicable, and more holistic, or more whole.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think if people are intending on coming into China to teach, there's still a big market for education.
Okay.
And I know the potential to grow as a teacher can be, into other fields can be enticing to a lot of people. Like when I first came in as a teacher, I was just that, a teacher. But then once you look around and you're like, oh, what other jobs are there within the education sector? If you're able to have other skills, you can grow into that field as well.
Hmm. Okay, that's good to
So,
know. So the
so yeah.
the the shift that you were mentioning, going from teacher centered to student centered and more communicable, or maybe you mean project based, whatever. Are you seeing that in the kind of public education, or is that in like the Hagwon or academy or after school programs?
That's happening a lot. All right, so for public schools rely more on the strong teacher model.
Teacher.
Because yeah, because generally speaking, in a public school, public school teacher might be teaching 60 to 120 kids within a classroom.
What?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's
Wow.
I think my wife was telling me she was in school and she went to public school. How many students were in your class?
High school,
Yep,
50.
like 50 students in a high school class.
Wow.
And so yeah, those are huge numbers. If you're going into more of a private school setting, the students numbers are less,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll be inclined to teach more of a student centered methodology, depending on the
Okay.
school, of course.
Right. Right. Okay. Hmm. And what do you think about the future of education in China?
Man, um,
Do you think we'll see,
what?
or do you think not we? I'm not there. I'm not Chinese. Do you think there'll be much more technology maybe involved in education, or what are your thoughts?
I think it, like ESL and education as an industry was already growing when parents had um, had their kids under the one child policy. Now they have two. So
Okay.
the potential is there. Like
Mm-hmm.
parents in China, they want to emphasize education to their kids, and
Yeah.
education is seen as a way to better themselves, um, socially, social mobility, how much they'll make, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a lot of students who are wanting to go abroad to the UK, Australia, Malaysia, the US, Canada,
Mhm.
New Zealand. A lot of these require like English, require English just to go to university. And so
Right.
you'll have students who are in school from second grade to college learning English. So there's a burgeoning market there. But I mean, in regards to the future, it's hard to say because from the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
you can see how the pandemic affected a lot of people who want to go abroad, for
Yes. Yeah.
education especially. And so there's been a drop in the number of people who are going into international based programs at uh, at private schools
Okay.
because they don't feel safe in a foreign country, in America, for example, or in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And so more parents are not inclined to sending their kids out there. So it might be harder times, but not necessarily that hard. It might be a little bit more difficult in the future couple of years. But after that, I think it'll be fine.
Are the students right now, or are many of them doing online? I know in Korea, they've kind of got this where public school students go one day a week, and then the rest of the time it's online. What's it like in China right now?
Um, I think students are just back at school, man.
Are they? Okay.
They're back at
With any
school.
restrictions? Like, do they have to wear a mask? Is there like a plastic divider or separation between seats? Anything like that?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure within the classroom themselves, but from what
Okay.
I've seen, students are still going to school, and it depends on different provinces. Some provinces are hit harder, are hit a lot
Sure.
harder than
Sure.
other provinces and cities,
Right.
um, and so there might be more restrictions. So I can't speak about all classrooms, but
Right.
like you can kind of tell by how people, if you're, but I could kind of feel how they treat the how they're treating the epidemic now, because
Hmm.
I go into the shopping malls, and when it was the height of the pandemic, I was like screened and monitored. I had to like enter in a QR code, and it was more lengthy just going into a shopping mall, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Nowadays, it's fine. You just go in, you wear a mask, everything's normal.
So
So
it's just wearing a mask now, huh?
I think so. They
Yeah.
have the governments are having a lot of they're using a lot of technology, and they're using a lot of trace back. Like
Yes.
where
Mm-hmm.
where is this unconfirmed case coming from, or who's getting sick,
Mm-hmm.
and so maybe temperature checks. I've seen a lot of temperature checks as well, so that's not unusual.
We have that everywhere over here now in Korea. It
Man,
didn't it
yeah,
didn't come for a bit. I mean, now at my university we have a temperature check, and I have a my university has an app where my ID is on there, and they scan my ID every time I go into a new building. Literally every
yes,
building I go into,
they do the
and
same. They do the same here. That you have a special QR code. Your phone is
mm-hmm,
synced to it. Your phone is being tracked.
yeah,
like like no matter where you go, the mobile service providers are tracking your movements. So
yeah,
if you're let's say if you're in Shenzhen a couple of weeks back, when there was a spread, they'll have you on record if you're within the area, and they'll probably come to your place because they know everything about you.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
yeah, that's the creepy side of of this, but I mean,
yeah,
pandemic containment, I guess.
yeah. Definitely containment. But that, I mean, it's good to know about the education system, and that the schools are getting back, and you know, I mean, I think students need that. They need the interaction. Hopefully, hopefully they can get back into the private schools, and eventually get back into the international schools that students want to get into. Um, in time will tell, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's the international school and like the colleges. Those are different games, man.
Yeah, exactly.
So broad.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. You got anything else you want to add?
um, I don't know. I guess should I tell people like where I came from
Sure, you
and
can do whatever you want, man. This is a
so
free podcast, brother.
I guess I'll start with a little timeline. When I graduated from university in California in 2010, I kind of thought I had my life planned out, but
Hmm.
it was during a huge recession, right? The huge recession of 2010. And I didn't want to go back to school for a master's. So I grabbed any job that came my way: marketing, admin assistant. These are low paying jobs, and you have to work long hours and things like that. They weren't fulfilling. So I decided to go to Korea to teach English at the time in 2012. So when I came into Korea during the summer months in 2012, I worked for a year in Jeonju, in Jeollabuk-do province. I really, really liked it, and I thought I could live there for a while. And I had a lot of free time on my hands
Hmm.
at that point. So I decided to look for a master's program to build my credentials, and that's where I met you, Jeff.
Yeah.
And I spent the next 18 months and all of my vacation time on it.
Yep.
Um, so by the time I graduated in the summer of 2015, I had my master's in education. I interviewed for a job at a university in Korea. I got it, right? They accepted me, and shortly after, I went on a vacation to Malaysia. So I got back and I needed to process my paperwork for employment at that university.
Hmm.
So my passport was close to expiring, and I canceled my work visa in Korea because I was expecting to get a new visa at that point, right? So they didn't accept my hiring and told me to do it next semester.
Oh
So
no.
those were some dark times in my life. So instead of waiting, once I got my passport back, like a month later, I decided to do a CELTA in Thailand,
Oh,
and
okay.
do some traveling. Yeah.
Cool.
Um, so these are like good times to build up credentials and build up like get proper certification.
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so at this point, I got a CELTA and a master's in education. I got back to the university in Korea, and they still didn't accept my application for employment. So I was like, whatever, bye. Yeah, for real, right? So I decided to say bye to Korea and then leave to go to China, because at that point, uh, a lot of a lot of the jobs that were being offered in China were the wages were a lot higher than Korea.
Okay.
So when I left to China, I taught a Korean at a Korean international school in Beijing. I thought yeah, for real. I thought that the transition would be a little easier because Korean culture, Beijing.
Uh-huh.
So I was there for a year, and then after a year, it was a pretty good year, I gotta admit. I traveled to other parts of China for work and other opportunities, and I've been out here ever since.
Wow.
So since then, I've been an international school teacher. I've been a curriculum designer and co-founder of a private language school, and currently I do high stakes testing as a language assessment consultant for a really big and established organization out here in China. And I'm doing all that while earning an MBA.
Wow.
So yeah, so there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right?
There always is,
um,
right? Everybody falls on these dark times, and sometimes they're hard to get out of because we want to see the light, and some people stop pushing, but that's a prime example of, man, there's so much out there. Just keep moving on.
but my point is it's just you're not going to Korea just to teach. You're there for more opportunities. You're
Yes.
you're
Yes.
you're going to China not just for teaching or not just for like doing small labor work. You're there for like more opportunities. It allows you for more um to like give you some time to just look around. And if you're entrepreneurial, you can go make a business. You
Yes.
know, if you're inclined to teaching, you can specialize in something and teach that. If you're inclined to like, you know, doing curriculum design for school, of course you can do that as well. So these days, my current job and academic pursuits require me to travel a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always on the go these days. Where have I been? I've been to Shenzhen, Xi'an, Kunming, Changsha quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
Fuzhou. Next week I'm going to Fuzhou, in Fujian province. Uh, I've been to Beijing. Just so many sites and just so many opportunities to like go out and explore. You know,
And how awesome is
and
that? I don't know about you. Is that something you like? Do you like traveling to all these places, or has it become burdensome?
for me, I think there's still like when I first joined, I was like, oh my god, like the first 3 months was like I was like a little kid in a candy store. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna go,
Yes.
we're gonna go here now. And my coworkers are like, John, this is for work, and I'm just like, oh man, I want to explore. We're going to a new place. Yes, I'm gonna, it that kind of died down a little bit, but I still appreciate going to like different places to
Yeah. Yeah.
for the scenery and things like that.
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. What a
I hope
story.
that
I
explains
mean,
a lot.
it definitely explains a lot. I mean, wow. Well, anybody listening to the podcast, that is a prime example of, we don't go for something, we go for experiences wherever we go, you know,
Yeah.
that's just a prime example. And, as I mentioned before, we all get to a dark point, and there's always a light there's always a light out there. So just reach out to people, right? Is that what you did, John? Did you know anybody in China before you went over?
I think when I went to China, I just knew my classmate who was in the
Hmm.
CELTA program,
Okay.
and you know, we've got to know each other, and then eventually I married her. Hey. So I
You
mean,
may even find your true love. People, go out and experience things. Come on.
man, when I left for Korea in 2012, I thought I'll be abroad for just a year, maybe two. I didn't think I'll be still out of the States for 8+ years. To me, that's just, man.
Hey, you know what? I'm on the same page. When I left for Korea, my plan was 5 countries in 5 years. That was my plan, and I'm still in Korea a decade later.
You, you stopped at one.
One. But I tell you what, I'm happy. I cannot complain. I'm super happy. got a lovely family over here, a fantastic job, and I'm running Yerba Travels podcast. So it's fantastic.
Hope your
So
listeners tune in. Man, this is, you know what, Jeff, it's great. I haven't heard from you for a while. And to be honest with you, yeah, I just love your podcast. I love that you're doing something like really productive. Like, I don't know what I've been doing. It's at work.
well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. And as we kind of wrap things up here, is there anything you'd like to promote or anything you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of organizations I've had the privilege of taking part in while living abroad,
Mm-hmm.
and I think would be useful for expats trying to expand their horizons and perhaps open more doors for them. I know Framingham State University opened doors up for Jeff and myself, right?
Right.
And also, I'm taking classes from the University of Hawaii in the Vietnamese Executive MBA program. It's accredited. All these programs are accredited.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to throw out Hanshi Education, the company I co-founded with my wife. Great education.
Hanshi Education. Is that right? Hanshi?
Yep.
Good. Big shout out to you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Good. Well, John, this has been fantastic. I honestly wish we could sit here and talk for another 3 or 4 hours because I'm sure we both have a lot more stories we could be sharing. But anyways, I just want to thank you again. And hopefully I'll have you on the show sometime again in the future.
Yeah, man. Glad to be on.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us here at Yerba Travels Podcast. So we are signing off. Yerba Travels Podcast. See ya.
All right. Bye.